Katie Couric. What if the sharpest mind in American journalism woke up one afternoon and couldn't tell you who the president was? Not because she wasn't paying attention, not because she was tired, because for a few hours her brain simply stopped saving anything new, like a camera that keeps taking pictures but never develops the film. This isn't a thriller plot. It happened 3 weeks ago, in the mountains of Colorado, to a woman who has spent 50 years being the person other people turn to when they need the facts straight. Katie Couric has interviewed presidents. She sat across from grieving families on the worst day of their lives, and somehow made them feel like the only person in the room. For 15 years, she was the voice that woke up half the country every morning on the Today Show. She's the kind of journalist whose whole career is built on one skill: remembering everything, so she can ask the one question nobody else thought of. So picture the irony. On a bright Saturday afternoon in June, at a festival built around big ideas, her own memory just switched off. Not faded, not fuzzy. Gone. Like someone reached in and deleted the files. Let's back up, because to understand how strange this moment really was, you need to understand who this woman is first. She was born in Arlington, Virginia, the youngest of 4 kids in a house where curiosity wasn't a personality trait, it was homework. Her dad worked in journalism and PR. Her mom ran the household with the kind of quiet expectation that turns kids into overachievers, without anyone raising their voice. Young Katie was the one soaking it all in at the dinner table, learning early that if you just ask the right question and then shut up and listen, people will tell you almost anything. She went to Yorktown High School, was into everything: cheerleading, yearbook, you name it. Then studied American Studies at the University of Virginia. Her first jobs weren't glamorous: desk assistant at ABC News, a stint at CNN, local news gigs in DC and Miami. The unglamorous grind that almost nobody watching the final result ever sees. Then in 1989, she landed at NBC News, and 2 years later, she took a seat that would define her for a generation: co-anchor of the Today Show. For 15 years, from 1991 to 2006, she was basically a fixture of the American morning. Coffee, toast, Katie. She interviewed heads of state and hurricane survivors with the same warmth, the same sharp follow-up questions. She wasn't the flashiest person on television. She was something better. She made you feel like whoever she was talking to actually mattered, whether that was a president or someone who'd just lost everything in a flood. Then in 2006, she made history, becoming the first woman to solo anchor a major network evening newscast at CBS. It wasn't an easy 5 years. Evening news audiences are notoriously loyal to habit, and change didn't come easy. But she stuck it out until 2011. After that came ABC, then Yahoo as global news anchor, and eventually she built something entirely her own. A media company, a newsletter, a podcast. An independent operation years before that became the normal career move for TV journalists. Here's the thing people forget about a 50-year career though. It isn't just built on wins. It's built on the losses that reshape you. In 1998, her husband, Jay Monahan, died of colon cancer. He was 42. They had 2 young daughters together. He'd started noticing symptoms at 41, before doctors typically recommended colon cancer screening at that age, and by the time it was caught, it was already too late to change the outcome. Katie was back on the air the following Monday, not because she was suppressing her grief, but because showing up for other people, even while carrying her own pain, is just who she is. But grief turned into something bigger for her. 2 years after Jay died, she did something almost nobody else on television would have done. She had a colonoscopy live, on camera, on the Today Show, and then sat down afterward to talk through the results, with her doctor, in front of millions of viewers. Researchers later studied what happened next, and found a real, measurable spike in colonoscopy screenings across the country in the months that followed. Doctors still refer to it as the Couric effect. Hundreds of thousands of people got screened because a television anchor was willing to be vulnerable on live TV. Some of those screenings caught cancer early enough to actually save lives. She co-founded what's now called the Colorectal Cancer Alliance, and spent the better part of 2 decades turning a taboo topic into a normal dinner table conversation. And then, in 2022, cancer found her anyway. Breast cancer, caught through a mammogram she'd actually delayed getting. She had a lumpectomy, went through radiation, and, true to form, documented the whole thing publicly. Because if her story could push one more woman to book her overdue mammogram, it was worth sharing. She recovered fully. But you have to wonder what it does to someone who spent decades preaching early detection, only to have the disease slip past her own defenses. It's a strange kind of humbling. Doing everything right doesn't make you bulletproof. She'd already learned that lesson once, at the worst possible cost, back in 1998. She carried it for almost 30 years. And this past June, in the thin, bright air of the Rockies, her body had one more surprise waiting. It was Saturday, June 27th. Couric and her husband, John Molnar, were in Aspen for the Ideas Festival. One of those gatherings where journalists, scientists, and big thinkers spend a few days trading ideas on stage. Exactly the kind of room she'd walked into 1,000 times before. She had 2 panels scheduled that afternoon at the Aspen Institute. Nothing unusual. Nothing that should have been remembered as anything but an ordinary workday. The morning went by easily. Then lunch. A hot dog from a stand near the venue. A completely forgettable detail, except it's the last thing she remembers. Everything after that, walking to the Institute, both panels, the questions asked, the answers she gave in front of a live audience, is simply not there. Not blurry. Not partial. Gone, the way a hard drive is gone after it's wiped. Toward the end of the second panel, people around her started noticing something off before she did. One of her interns flagged it and got John's attention. By the time he reached her, she was clearly disoriented. 2 people nearby happened to have medical training, an EMT and a physician, and checked her out on the spot. Her pulse and blood pressure were a little elevated, nothing wildly abnormal. But combined with how confused she seemed, it was enough to call it, she needed to go to the hospital. She didn't understand why. The drive to Aspen Valley Hospital takes only a few minutes. In the car, it became obvious this wasn't ordinary confusion. Not jet lag, not altitude, not a bad night's sleep. She didn't know what day it was. When a doctor later asked her simple orientation questions, the month, the year, who's president, she got them wrong. She thought it was 2024. She believed Joe Biden was still in the Oval Office. Sit with that for a second. A woman who has interviewed literally every living American president, who has pressed them on hard questions in front of the whole country, could not tell you who currently held that job. Not from ignorance, because the part of her brain responsible for anchoring her to right now had just quietly gone dark. At the hospital, doctors moved fast to rule out the scariest possibilities first. Stroke, brain bleed, anything structural that would need immediate treatment. They ordered an emergency MRI. It came back clean. No stroke, no bleeding. Physically, her brain looked completely normal. But her memory clearly wasn't working. And this is the part that sticks with you. Over the next several hours, John watched his wife, a woman whose sharpness he knows better than almost anyone alive, introduce herself to the same nurse, again and again. She was awake, alert. She knew who she was. She could hold a conversation. But she couldn't hang on to anything new for more than a few minutes. Each time a nurse walked back into the room, it was, to her, the very first time they'd met. Same handshake, same introduction. Over and over. John later described it simply. She reintroduced herself to the nurses every time they walked in. 6 plain words, but they capture something enormous. The professional habit of introducing herself clearly, still fully intact, while the memory that should have told her, "We've already done this," had just vanished. This is really what memory is, if you think about it. It's not just a filing cabinet of facts. It's the thread connecting one moment to the next, the thing that lets you experience time as a continuous story, instead of an endless series of unconnected nows. Take that thread away, and every face is a new face. Every room is a room you've just walked into. That was Katie's reality for several hours that Saturday. She later described her missing time, roughly noon until about 7 p.m., as a big black hole, not a haze, a void where nothing at all got recorded. The recordings of her actual panels exist. Other people in that room remember every word. But the woman who said those words has no access to any of it. It's a strange kind of absence. Not the absence of having been somewhere, but the absence of having experienced being there at all. John stayed with her through the whole thing. The resets, the repeated introductions, the long stretch of not knowing when or if her memory would come back. And eventually, doctors landed on a diagnosis: transient global amnesia. Break the name down, and it tells you exactly what happened. Transient, temporary, passing, not permanent. Global, it hit memory broadly, not just one narrow slice of it. Amnesia, the inability to form or pull up memories. Put together, a sudden, sweeping, but temporary shutdown of the memory system that resolves completely on its own in most cases, without lasting damage. It's genuinely rare. Somewhere between roughly 3 and 10 people out of every 100,000 experience it in a given year, though the odds climb noticeably for people over 50. Most doctors will see only a handful of cases in their entire careers, and it's terrifying in the moment, precisely because it can look, from the outside, like a stroke or the start of dementia, the two things people that age fear most. A neurologist who spoke with Couric afterward, Dr. David Perlmutter, put it plainly. Someone going through this is awake, alert, knows exactly who they are, recognizes the people around them, and can carry on a normal conversation. They just can't remember what happened 5 minutes ago. The identity is intact. The personality is intact. The only thing that's failed is the specific mechanism that takes a fresh experience and files it away for later. So they ask the same question again and again. They introduce themselves to the same nurse 4 times in an hour, because to them, each moment genuinely does arrive brand new, disconnected from everything before it. Nobody fully knows what causes it. The leading theory points to a brief disruption in blood flow to the hippocampus, the part of the brain responsible for turning short-term experience into lasting memory. But why it happens, and why it resolves so completely afterward, science still can't fully explain. What doctors do know is the rough pattern of triggers: intense physical exertion, heavy lifting, sudden emotional shock, sharp pain, even things as ordinary as straining or a coughing fit. Couric went through the list herself afterward, and couldn't find a clean match. No workout, no heavy lifting, no single moment of shock she could point to. Just an intense, high-altitude, intellectually stimulating day. And then, nothing. Many people who go through this never find a tidy explanation, which is its own kind of unsettling. The thing just happens, and then it's over, with no satisfying story attached. Here's the genuinely reassuring part, though. Transient global amnesia does not raise your risk of stroke. It does not signal early dementia. It doesn't point toward any kind of progressive brain disease. People who go through one episode are no more likely to develop Alzheimer's or vascular dementia later than anyone else their age. It's alarming to witness and, medically speaking, actually one of the better diagnoses a neurologist can hand a family in an emergency room, because it means this will pass and it likely won't come back. By the time doctors were confident in the diagnosis, the episode was already loosening its grip. The gaps between memory resets started stretching out. By evening, she was starting to feel like herself. Her memory of that specific afternoon was never coming back, but her ability to form new memories going forward, to actually live inside the present moment again, was returning. 9 days later, she sat down and wrote about the whole thing publicly. In an essay she titled, "The Day I'll Never Remember." Classic her. Clear-eyed, a little wry, completely unflinching. She didn't have to share any of it. She could have kept it private, just something she and her family dealt with quietly. Nobody would have blamed her. But that's never been how she operates. If sharing something hard and honest might help even one person understand what's happening to them, or to someone they love, it's worth doing. She walked through the whole afternoon in that essay. The hot dog stand, the moment her husband got the call, The version of herself that genuinely believed it was still 2024, and Joe Biden was president. She didn't soften any of it. She let her husband add his own account too, describing the hours in that hospital room like a loop that kept resetting. And she was honest about something else too. She said she's been tempted to actually watch the footage from those 2 panels. To see herself functioning, competent, present, doing her job, while having zero memory of any of it now. But she also admitted she isn't ready yet. Not quite. Watching yourself live through hours you'll never personally remember requires a kind of emotional readiness that apparently doesn't just arrive because the medical news is good. That admission might be the most human line in the whole account. A clean diagnosis and a reassuring prognosis don't automatically add up to feeling okay. Recovery isn't a straight line, even when your brain scan is. Going forward, the odds are genuinely good. Only a small minority of people who go through one episode of transient global amnesia, somewhere around 2 to 5% within 5 years, depending on the study, ever have a second one. There's no known way to prevent it, because nobody fully understands what causes it in the first place. But there's also no evidence Couric did anything wrong, or that any lifestyle change would have stopped it. It just happened. And then it was over. She's already back to her work. Her newsletter, her podcast, the long-form journalism and advocacy that's defined the last chapter of her career. She's 69, and in the years since leaving the anchor desk, she's built something that answers to nobody but her own editorial judgment. She built that after breast cancer. She's continuing it after this. There's a thread running through this entire life. From the kid in Arlington who learned that listening is more powerful than talking, to the young reporter grinding through local news, to the anchor who put her own body on live television to save strangers' lives, to the woman who kept showing up on air the week her husband died, to the cancer survivor who turned her own diagnosis into one more chance to help somebody else. The thread isn't fame, or the awards, or the historic firsts. It's presence. Showing up, fully, even when the moment is frightening, even when the honest version of events is harder to say than a comfortable one would be. She's interviewed every living American president. For a few hours in June, she couldn't remember who currently held that job. She's built 50 years of a career on the power of memory and detail, and there's now a permanent gap in the middle of one Saturday that no amount of relief will ever fill back in. But black holes have edges, and past the edge, everything keeps going. The work continues. The questions keep getting asked with the same precision, the same nerve, the same refusal to settle for the easy answer when the harder, truer one is the one that actually matters. So here's the question worth sitting with. What does it mean to build an entire career on remembering everything? And then have your own mind take a handful of hours away from you, and just keep going anyway. Maybe that's the real definition of resilience. Not never losing anything, but choosing to show up again the next morning regardless. If this story hit you, drop a comment about a moment of hers that stuck with you over the years. An interview, a morning she was on your TV, whatever it was. And if you want more stories like this, real, human, a little messy, and worth talking about, hit subscribe and stick around.